Yeah, I'm Paula. I'm part of the RISE team. So I've been asked to talk about sexual exploitation and mental health and the role of the RISE team in 20 minutes. So anybody that knows me knows that I can talk about child sexual exploitation for about 8 or 9 hours. So I'm not much fun at parties, I can tell you. It certainly shuts people up when they ask me what I do. So I'm funded by Health. I'm part of NHFT, and the CCG funds me as well. And I support all our health practitioners across the whole of the county, both hospitals and community staff and CAMS, with any cases of child sexual exploitation. I also am part of the RISE team, and I will talk a little bit more about RISE and show you some statistics that we have within RISE and what the picture is across the whole of the county for child sexual exploitation. I'm going to say CSE. I hate shortening things, but child sexual exploitation is such a long phrase to keep saying, so I hope that's okay with everybody. So I'll just start with a definition of what CSE is. So there are several definitions. This is in consultation at the moment by the government looking at CSE because it's actually a form of child sexual abuse. And I think other definitions perhaps didn't make that very clear. And I think we need to be talking more about what CSE is. It's been around for thousands of years. Exploitation of children for sexual purposes has been around for a very long time. We just now have a name for it. And as you can see, it occurs for all children under 18. And I'm aware that, with CareLeavers, we don't accept anybody over 18 in our service because of capacity issues. But obviously we do have a lot of children within our service that are looked after children, and we will work with them as they exit our service. So CSE affects all children under 18 where they are made to do sexual activities either online or in the community for something in return. And that may well be gifts, money, attention, somewhere to stay. And because of the grooming process, which I will briefly show you, they are not making a choice. So just briefly, as I say, I could talk about this forever. Some of the push and pull factors that we have within CSE. So what makes a young person or child vulnerable to CSE? You've just got a handful of them there. And as you can see, looked after children and accompanied asylum seekers are there as well. So they are extremely more vulnerable to being sexually exploited if you are a looked after child. Children that come from any form of difficult home life, neglect, any sort of abuse that goes on for them, parents with high levels of vulnerabilities will make a child much more vulnerable. Saying that, some children, maybe who do not have a lot of resilience and come from families where there are none of these push factors, will still be pulled into CSE. So don't think that it's just all those children that are in CSE, because it isn't. All children are vulnerable to being exploited. And the pull factors are those things that keep them in the CSE. So, sorry, was somebody putting their hand up? No? Oh, sorry. So receiving attention, accommodation, food or gifts, being liked by someone, having attention either on the internet or in the community, being offered somewhere to stay where there are no rules or boundaries, and violence, any threats of violence and isolation works. When I do the training presentations, I have lots and lots of slides on risk indicators and what to look out for. I haven't got time for that today, but some of the things that you should be thinking about with young people that are exploited is going missing, and some of those expressions of despair. So when we look at mental health and we talk about emotional well-being, some of the behaviours that you might see in young people, self-harming, will be perhaps maybe a way of saying something's going on for me and I can't say. Pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections that are occurring, making an allegation of a rape or a sexual assault or a physical assault and then withdrawing. They're the sort of things that you might be looking out for. As I say, there's lots to sort of cover. What I will say as well is boys and girls are sexually exploited by women and men. So please don't think just because the media often report that it's females, boys are very, very not really considered that they are sexually exploited. So please bear that in mind. So grooming, I talked about grooming. Oh, sorry, I'll just come back to that previous slide. The little quote at the top about Bernardo's, no child consents to their own abuse because the grooming process is so powerful that they are not making a choice. And when you see the grooming line, you've probably seen, anybody's come to any of my presentations before, you will have seen this. The grooming line is a very, very powerful, persuasive, manipulative, coercive way of getting a child and a young person to do exactly what a perpetrator wants them to do. So it starts off with the targeting stage, where a friendship may be built up with that young person and somewhere perhaps for them to hang about with that adult. And then it moves into that more sort of nobody understands you like I do, come and stay with me. And then they may move on to a little bit of inappropriate sexual touching to see what happens with that, to see testing them out. And as you can see already, if you've got a young person that has one of those vulnerabilities, especially a looked after child, then there'll be a sort of a need to be wanted, seeking out that attention. It can move into a loving relationship stage. Quite often, a young person will think they're in a relationship with a perpetrator, who is invariably an adult. We do have peer-on-peer exploitation, but that's generally because that peer has been exploited themselves. So if you've got a young person saying that they're in a relationship with somebody who's much older than them, even by only 2 or 3 years, if you've got a 14-year-old in a relationship with an 18-year-old and there's a sexual relationship, that's exploitation. That's actually against the law because the age of consent is 16. And then it can move quite quickly into an abusive relationship stage. It doesn't always go into a loving relationship stage, but a lot of the time it will do. And then it will move on to that more coercive. There are some similarities between the grooming process and what happens within that perpetrator-victim relationship and domestic abuse, where you have that coercive, controlling behaviour. And if you've got a young, vulnerable person who's unable to actually say what's going on for them, and even being able to verbalise their feelings, then and that's how powerful the grooming process is. Can everybody see that? Is that quite clear? Is it blurry? Is it a bit blurry? Okay, so I'm very aware there's a lot of mental health professionals in the room, so I'm just going to very briefly touch on the teenage brain. The neuroscience of the teenage brain is absolutely fascinating, and as most of you probably know, that the brain is very, very reliant on stimulation and positive experiences from birth, and then starts to develop and grow. Around about 3 years old, starts to just sort of form a little bit more, and then from 13 to 17, it goes through another growth spurt. So if a child has grown up with adverse experiences, then obviously it's going to affect their teenage brain, their brain development once they hit puberty. The plasticity of the brain means that those good experiences of support can have a lasting effect on their development, but obviously if they've got difficult relationships, then that will affect the way that their brain is developing. So because adolescence is that increased vulnerability, that time of lots of changes for them, it makes them, their risk of experiencing trauma is particularly high, and it means that their brain development will be severely affected by any trauma that they experience. Young people will trigger risk-taking behaviour because we know that they are seeking out different experiences, and because of the way that the grooming process will work, sometimes they're making what we see as choices when actually they're not, because they're in a position where their brain cannot fully understand what's going on for them. And they may view grooming as being nurtured. So I'm just going to move on quickly and look at emotional well-being. So when we think about emotional issues within a child's life, what goes on for them means that they cannot always regulate their emotions. Bernardo's do a lot of very good work. If you're interested in CSE and that emotional wellbeing stuff, Bernardo's have done a lot of really good studies. And this one that I've quoted from, Promoting Children's Emotional Health, is really, really useful. So that's saying that up to 20% of children and young people may be affected by some sort of emotional behavioural issues. And we're talking about children generally, perhaps where there's resilience, where there's protective factors, where they're coming from those homes, like Richard talked about, that's those sort of more stable homes, and let alone children that have got all those vulnerabilities that we looked at when I showed you the push factors. So if you've got a looked after child and you're saying that 20% will be affected by an emotional disorder, that they're on a bit of a back foot before they start, really. And obviously studies suggest that 1 in 4 children in care have significant levels of emotional adjustment. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about mental health. And just to quote to you, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, that health is the basis for a good quality of life, and mental health is of very vital importance. You're all here because you believe that, so that's good to know. When we look at sexual abuse, again, I could talk for hours and hours on sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and how that affects a young person's ability to regulate their emotions, to look at how they cope with trauma. And again, a little bit like Ali said about the mental health and drug and alcohol issues, we have a lot of drug and alcohol issues within children that are being sexually exploited. We have a lot of mental health issues within children that are being exploited. So if you've got a young person who's self-harming, maybe taking overdoses, do we have an underlying mental health condition there? Or actually, is it because they're being sexually exploited? And that's what I call an expression of despair, because they do not know how to deal with what's going on for them. So when I go to A&E and I do training at both hospitals, I talk to A&E staff and I remind them that if they have a young person coming in who's had an overdose, are they checking who's brought them in, what's going on for them, are they thinking that maybe there could be some exploitation? I have to get it into perspective. I see sexual abuse in everything, so I will always be saying, have you thought of sexual abuse or sexual exploitation? But thinking about trauma and thinking about how that affects a young person's ability to recognise what's going on for them, it will severely affect their mental health. And as it says there, because of the way the teenage brain is developing, they're highly vulnerable to trauma and how that manifests in their behaviour. I've just sort of put up a little bit, I haven't talked a great deal about disability, but if we're thinking about young people, children that have any sort of disability whatsoever are more at risk of being abused generally. So that I haven't got statistics for that, but we do know that they're more at risk. But children that have autistic spectrum disorders are highly vulnerable because they're unable to read cues. So the way that they deal with communication is extremely difficult. Different to how a child without ASD. We know that boys are more likely to have autism, and we know that the whole social constructs of their relationships are very different to how a child without ASD will be. So if you think you've got a child who has ASD or Asperger's or any other social disorder, and then you have a groomer who uses that very powerful grooming process to befriend and manipulate and coerce a young person, you can see that you're going to end up with a big concern there. Okay, I've thrown this in because this is something that I've noticed within our service. 1 in 29 school children, generally, in the UK, have been bereaved of a parent or a sibling. What I'm noticing within RISE is a significant number of our children have had bereavement. And I'm looking into research and thinking about why is that the case. So research suggests that bereaved children may experience some sort of psychological problem, behavioural somatic problems, and difficulties with performance and their peer relationships. And we're talking about children who haven't been exploited. So if you're a bereaved child and nobody has helped you, supported you, done any work with you, you're more likely to have some of those problems. All our referrals, we had 44 referrals come into the RISE team between July and September this year. 41% of those children had a significant bereavement of a sibling or a parent. It's high, isn't it? 25% of our children open to RISE are looked after children. So children that are bereaved obviously have a more high vulnerability. And any loss that we see. So I keep a bit of a record. I have contact with the young people and I talk to the engagement workers that work with the young people within our service, and we look at what's going on for them, where the bereavement sits, what's going on for their emotional well-being, what can we do about that. And loss, if we've got loss for a child that's taken into care, or we've got a child whose perhaps parent's gone to prison, or there's an absent parent, loss is going to have a similar effect. Not as powerful as bereavement, but it's still very powerful. So I'm racing through. I'm sorry, I can talk really fast. Any questions on what I've just said? Oh, okay. So the RISE team, so who are we? We stand for Reducing Incidents of Sexual Exploitation. We're a multi-agency team. We are based at police headquarters in Northampton for now. We're being evicted fairly soon because there's a school being built there. So we, as Ali said, Ali can are part of RISE. We're a multi-agency team and we all sit together within police headquarters. So we have our online CSE team, we have police investigators, and we have police proactive team that do disruption and check things out if we've got, say, groups of young people hanging around and we think maybe there's a perpetrator there. Our proactive team will go and do some disruption and talk to that person. We are very, very lucky, and I know I'm in the team, so I can say that, but we are very lucky to have such a good team within this county. I get asked to go, as part of my role, I get asked to go and talk to health commissioners in other areas. I've been to Warwickshire and Leicestershire and all over the place. And not everywhere has a multi-agency team in the way we do. We are really, really lucky, and our young people and children in this county are really lucky to have that team. We only work with level 3, 4 social care, high-risk children. And I'm very aware that we have lots of children that we decline, that we aren't able to accept in our service, that are still very concerning with CSE. And I know that is in discussions and various pots of money for what another service might look like. So within the team we have me, we have engagement workers that work with the young people and go and do safety work with them. They do plans of work with our young people. We don't have an end point, which is why we have, do we have 6 on our waiting list, Ali? Probably more after the 9 on our waiting list. So we have 57 children open to us and 9 on our waiting list. And Ali and I are here today, but on a Tuesday morning, we have a referrals meeting. So all our referrals come through social care to us. We do all our research from our own agency. We sort of look at where the risks are and we have a discussion about whether we accept that young person or not. And Ali and I have missed that this morning, but we sent all our information and what we think. So every week we have a meeting, and that's why it says at the bottom, weekly education and youth representation, because they come to our referrals meeting. So we feed in all that sharing of information about those risks. As you can imagine, it's highly confidential. So anybody in health that will see that maybe I've gone into the records, I generally don't put what the crime is or what's gone on for that young person. There may be something. If you see that and you think, I'm working with that young person, I want to know a bit more, ring me or email me and I can share what's going on for that young person. We also sit with our missing persons unit for the police and for social care. And as I said, missing is a huge risk factor for CSE. And you've got the RISE team details there as well, because you'll have these slides. So just very briefly, the current picture. 67% of our young people open to us are 13 to 15, and we know, when I talked about the plasticity of the brain, the teenage brain, that 13 to 15 is quite a window of opportunity for what might happen for that young person. That's most of our, 96% are females. It's going up a little bit now. These slides are a few months old. We've had more boys referred into our service, which is great, because I go everywhere I talk about boys. Don't forget boys, because boys are exploited too. They just don't show us that they're being exploited. So young females may well present perhaps with ST and sexually transmitted infection or potential pregnancy. A boy will perhaps kick off and be really aggressive. So nobody's going to think maybe he's being sexually exploited. So our ethnic spread of our young people show that we're mainly white British, but again we know that maybe it's underreported within other ethnic groups, so we want to raise more awareness of that. And then, as I've said, 25%, let's say these slides are it's 25% of our cases are looked after children. That's the current picture. It's sort of missed off a little bit, I'll read. So, yeah, I don't know what's happened to that. Bear with me. Okay, so this is Northampton. So this is the open cases per town from August last year to February this year. So Northampton, as you can see, we have our most numbers of CSE cases in Northampton. Then we've got Kettering, then we've got Corby, then we've got Wellingborough, Daventry and South Northants, East Northants, and then other. We had numbers very low, as you can see, in Corby, which is the third one in, up until the new year, and we sort of recognised that we weren't getting many referrals in from Corby. What's going on? Either they don't have any CSE or something, we're missing something. So, and we know CSE happens everywhere. So we went and the police did a big media drive in Corby, and as you can see, we had a bit of a spike in February, and the numbers are still going up from Corby. That's our little legal just picture for you to see. Most of our children, over half, are on a child in need plan. Some are on child protection plan. This is the child in need plan, the red. I need a pointer or a very large stick, or I need ladders. Child protection plan, section 20, section 31. So there are looked after children up there. Okay, and I just wanted to, just while I've got you here, capture what I think when we have discussions within RISE about the way forward. We work with crisis, but we need to start doing more prevention. So it's great to be asked to come here today, thinking about those young people that will be leaving care, but also the young people you work with already in care that maybe are not in CSE or on the fringes of CSE. So how can we protect them? So thinking about their emotional well-being and their mental health. So if you've got bereavement, looking at what good bereavement care counselling looks like. If you said to anybody, you've been bereaved, have some bereavement counselling, that doesn't mean anything to us as adults, we sort of get it. But if you're 12 years old and your mum's just died and somebody offers you bereavement counselling, you're not going to take it. There's lots of studies about bereavement and how good quality family support is there. If you're in care, you're not going to get that. So that good quality counselling and therapy is needed. We've got helplines. Charities that support the work locally, Richard's mentioned a lot of these already, and then excellent services for those children within the care system, looking at how we build their resilience. I'm not going to do this because I know Anwin's doing resilience later, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about protective behaviours, because I talk a lot to maternity services and health visitors about protective behaviours and how we need to use protective behaviours within schools and preschool to build resilience in children. So protective behaviours is a practical, down-to-earth approach to personal safety. And as you can see, it leads to self-empowerment, builds resilience and self-esteem, helps people see people as people, so avoids people seeing themselves or others as victims or any other label. I just want to come back quickly to people about being people, about thinking about yourself. So it talks a lot about feelings and about your body. So I have a Twitter account for this role. I have 379 followers, which is amazing because I can't believe so many people are that interested in CSE. But what I do retweet a lot of is about stuff that the NSPCC do about what's in your pants, thinking about your bodies. If we were teaching children very early on about feeling safe and what feels safe and what doesn't feel safe, when a groomer starts to try and groom a young person, they'll suddenly start to realise something doesn't feel right because they've got that internal system already. I'm having a little look now, I can see. And I just wanted to show one of my favourite people from history. You probably can't see him very clearly there. Frederick Douglass, social reformer, absolutely amazing chap, brilliant. If you can read any of his stuff, he wrote books about it. He was a slave, he got out of slavery, he was a social reformer. He talks about it being easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. And if you think that he was alive quite some time ago, and I'm standing here in his shadow, really, because he was an amazing guy, talking about the ability to how we need to build resilience for young people. Okay, that's a very whistle-stop tour through CSE and mental health. That's me. That's RISE details if you need to speak to RISE. I haven't talked about how you would get referrals into us. Come and talk to me at lunch and I can tell you about that. And follow me on Twitter.